Hi everybody, welcome to day 7 of my Facebook Live 30-day language facilitation challenge. Today's topic is a very common one. Today we're going to talk about ear infections and middle ear fluid, and we're going to talk about how those ear infections and middle ear fluid cause difficulty with speech and language development and also with sensory issues. So, just in case, hey, thanks, Summer is here. Hi, Summer and Tanya. Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you're catching the replay, thanks so much for stopping in. Just so you know, all these videos in this 30-day language facilitation challenge are going to be available here on my Facebook page and also on my YouTube channel. So you're able to binge watch me talking about language facilitation. Anyway, just in case you don't know me, my name is Marcy Melzer, and I am an intuitive speech-language pathologist. And I've taken on this 30-day challenge to come to you live on Facebook and record these videos to help everybody out there who has a child, who knows a child, who is a grandparent or parent or friend or neighbor of a child who is late talking, that you, as the people who are the most important in their lives, are the ones who can do their language facilitation. So parents are their child's best language facilitators, and this 30-day challenge is all about helping you understand how to do that and some tips and tricks and the things that I just know about what's important about this message. So if you know somebody and you want to share the whole 30 days, the YouTube channel is going to be a great way to do that, and that link is going to be in the description and the comments as soon as I'm getting done recording it. All right, so today's topic, let's get on to it, is about ear fluid. Now, ear fluid is the #1 cause for late talking. Hands down. Statistics from various different places, including the CDC and the government and the American Speech and Hearing Association, talk about children between 18 months or 12 months and up to 5 to 7 to 8 years old. It could be anywhere between 15 to 20% of the population of those kids has experienced at least one ear infection, and it happens probably more often in some kids than others, and it depends on the reason that it's that age range that causes so many ear infections is because of the head, the shape of the head. So I'm going to give you just a little bit of an anatomy lesson here. Thanks, everybody. Hey, Roland is here, and Gina, thanks you guys for stopping in to check out my live today. We're talking about ear infections and why ear infections are so common in little kids. And it's all because of the shape of their head. So little kids, the shape of their head is more like a cantaloupe or a basketball, a round, a spherical shape. And as we grow, our heads, some of us more than others, grow to be more of an elongated shape, more like a watermelon shape or a rugby ball shape. And the tubes that connect your nose and your ears is where the fluid retains. It's called your Eustachian tube. And so that tube that connects between your nose and your ears, that's the tube that gets clogged when you have an ear infection. It's also the area that you feel the pressure when you're going up and down in an airplane or an elevator. That's the area. It's called your Eustachian tube. And it attaches basically your sinuses and your nose all the way down to your eardrums. And so everything in between. And when you have any kind of congestion or anything like that, it has access to get to that area. So it's like when you have a bad cold, that area gets contained and it feels very congested. Now, there are many different reasons that the fluid ends up in those tubes, but the reason that ear infections happen more in little kids is because the shape of that head, like a sphere like that, the tubes are actually angled down, not on this big of a level, but I'm just doing this way so that you can understand, so that between your nose and your ears, it actually is connected down. So if any kind of congestion gets in there, it's going to slide down that tube and stick here in your ears. Your nose is higher than your ears. the fluid's going to stay down that way. Now, as you grow, as adults, those tubes end up more flat. And sometimes even angled down. But if they're flatter, when you go like this and you sniff in, you can actually suck down and use your, lungs to suck the mucus or whatever stays in there. I know this isn't a very attractive topic. We're talking about snot here, guys. So whenever that stuff gets stuck in there and you can inhale or blow your nose or expel it out and the tube is flat, it's easier to get it out one way or the other, down your throat, out your nose, whatever. But when it's like this and this fluid stays down at the bottom, even blowing your nose, even using that suction-y thing, and babies don't have a really good ability to get all that done, so it sticks. It stays down there. And it gets gunky and becomes infected, and that's called glue ear. So if you've ever heard of anything like that, or if your child has glue ear or has infections like that, it doesn't necessarily always get infected, but it does stay in there. And it's basically bacteria coming from the, congestion that you have. It might be generated because of allergies. It might be generated because you have a virus. So in those cases, like if you have a viral infection in your throat and that's the stuff, the bacteria that gets down there, that's when it gets infected. And of course, the area down here at the bottom of that tube, right here by your ear, inside by your eardrum, is tiny, tiny bones and nerves and all of these things that are super, super sensitive. So when the fluid gets down and gets stuck in there and stays in there for a while because there's no way for it to get out, because there's no kind of ability to get it, it gets stuck in there and gets infected and stays. So that's sort of the anatomy, that's sort of physiologically what happens that causes fluid to stay stuck in your ears. I just want to see, Anjana's here and Brianna's here. Thank you for joining me, you guys. And Tammy too. Hey, guys. Thanks for joining me today. We're in the middle of we're just finishing the first week. I can't believe I've made it a whole week doing this 30-day live Facebook language facilitation challenge I'm doing for myself. And today's topic about ear infections is a really big deal because a lot of people, the number one cause of late talking is this fluid. And now I'm getting ready to tell you why that fluid is the problem. So it actually causes problems from 3 different angles. First of all, the fluid itself, just the presence of fluid inside your ear, is going to cause problems with the physiology of it. There's bacteria in there, and there's stuff that these sensitive parts of the middle part of your ear, all of that's going to be affected by any kind of stuff in your ear like that. And then just the presence of it is actually blocking the ability to be able to hear. So it's going to cause hearing loss no matter if there's a little bit of fluid, because a lot of people will say, well, I can see that there's fluid in there, but there's not very much. Any kind of fluid is like you being under only a little bit of water. Or, so maybe you're in the swimming pool and you're completely underwater and you can't hear much, but if you're, at the edge like this and you can sort of hear, but you can't get out of it, any kind of fluid inside your ear is going to cause hearing loss because it doesn't allow your eardrums to move, it doesn't allow the little bones to move, and it doesn't allow the mechanism of hearing to operate properly. So the presence of the fluid itself is going to cause a problem. And then the second thing is the infection, because the infection is going to cause irritability in the surrounding tissues, of course, anytime there's an infection. So that's going to cause maybe more physiological damage of the actual eardrum or the bones or the jaw bones and bones that are around. And then the other thing that is the problem with infection is pain. So where there's just fluid, you might feel pressure. And you'll feel the difference, potentially like you would in an elevator going up and down or an airplane or something like that. Or like you have when you have a cold, you feel like you can't hear and you feel that pressure in your head. There is that, that the fluid is causing. But this infection is a whole new level of pain. If you've ever had an ear infection, you understand what it's like. Those nerves are very, very sensitive in that part of the head and part of the ears. And so if a child has an ear infection, just one, it's going to cause a lot of pain. And when you have that kind of pain in your head, it's very difficult for you to, to process and learn anything. So you can imagine how a lot of kids who have repeated ear infections can look very withdrawn and not want to participate with other people. They can avoid noise or things like that, because when there's pain in your head, especially around in your ear area, the last thing you want is loud stuff around you or noisy things. And you might want to withdraw, and you might want to go into, your quiet room and hide away from people. And you might even want to avoid conversation with other people. And so just the pain from ear infections can cause a child to show behavioral things that might make them look like they have an autism issue or a social issue of another kind. And what the problem is really is just that their head hurts. So that pain in itself is a real issue, and it not only just affects your physiology, but your learning. The other issue that goes with ear fluid, sort of physiologically, is how it's treated. So any kind of intervention in how you're going to take care of some physiological thing, you're changing the physiology of it. So, hey, Christine, she says, amen. So the thing is, when you are looking at the issue about what treats this ear infection, you have to understand that it's invading your child somehow. So if it's medication, we'll just clear up the ear infection, or we'll clear up the fluid with medication like allergy medicines, or antibiotics for sure with an infection, or decongestants. So those three kind of medications do things to your whole systems, and they can affect you. And sometimes people tolerate them better than others, especially kids. So antibiotics, what happens sometimes is the infections keep reoccurring, and then the antibiotics, the standard amoxicillin, those kind of ones, they don't necessarily maintain their effectiveness. So people end up going with stronger antibiotics, and then those things affect kids other ways physiologically, in their stomachs and in their throats. They get secondary infections, yeast infections, things like that from the antibiotics. So they can't use the antibiotics anymore, and they tough out ear infections. So medicine in its own self can cause other physiological things. And then, if you do repeated ear surgeries, sometimes kids get the grommets, they call them in some countries, or ear tubes as they call them in the United States, to drain that fluid, which is incredibly effective. But some kids have to go surgery after surgery after surgery, or some people avoid that surgery, and instead of getting the pressure relieved, they don't opt for that surgery, which is bloodless and easy, by the way, and relieves that pressure. But if they don't get the surgery, then the fluid builds to the point where the eardrum ruptures, which, if the infection alone was painful, an eardrum rupture is astronomically painful. And I have experienced it myself, so I know how it is. And I was an adult when it happened and didn't go to the doctor to follow up on my ear infection, and that's what happened. And it's incredibly painful. And if the infection stays in the position too long and doesn't get evacuated, somehow that fluid stays in there, the infection can actually morph into the bones. So it is important to get rid of the infection, but it's also really important to get rid of the fluid and the glue that is the glue ear. So the intervention must be appropriate. In every case is going to be different. So if it's not an infectious situation, you don't necessarily have to treat it medically, but you might need to use tubes. Your doctor, your ear, nose, and throat doctor, or your holistic doctor, who's somebody who's going to look at your whole, like Christine, who's on here now, you need to have somebody who's able to look at what's causing them, because the other kind of intervention for ear infections, which is very common and has been very effective, that's less invasive, is chiropractic. But also diet has made a difference, because if it's allergies that cause this fluid and you stop some issues that cause allergies, so allergy testing could be the way to go. It could be fluid, it could be tubes, it could be antibiotics, it could be a combination. So the most important thing is that you address the fluid, address the infection, and look at it from an intervention perspective that's not going to be potentially more damage than not. So, I think that it's really appropriate. And Christine's got a comment in the bottom too about it, that, don't know about this rupture. Yeah, seriously, that rupture situation is very, very painful. So, what I want to talk about now, since everybody's joining me, I see there's a few people on live. Thanks so much. If you're joining me for the replay and you have a kid who has had these chronic ear infections, and you have been working hard to get rid of this fluid and all of that stuff that is causing it to stay there, give me a thumbs up, because I want to know that this video is reaching the right folks. I want to know that folks who are dealing with their kids who have these chronic ear infections and chronic ear fluid, it's really, really important that you get that done. So if you're participating in this 30-day challenge and you're checking out what they are, this would be the video for you to share with your friends who know somebody who has glue ear, chronic ear infections, or even just the doctor says there's fluid, but it's not causing. Because I just had a phone conversation, a strategy session with a mom yesterday, Brittany, who called me because she has twins, and her one twin was learning everything fabulously, and her other twin was learning language, but having trouble with speech development issues, with sounds. And she was teaching twin number one these ability to overcome any of the natural developmental articulation problems that were going on, but she was having difficulty with twin number two because, she couldn't figure out why. So she called me to have a strategy session, and I talked to her about what was going on, and I started to dig into what could be the difference, what's going on. And when I asked her what her doctor said, she said that was her case, that the doctor had mentioned that there was fluid there, but it was just a little fluid and it didn't look infected or anything. And I said, bingo, that's what's going on. So now I'm going to tell you, because of her case, that's how the universe brings me these ideas. I know it must be happening out there, that doctors are just kind of naysaying the fact that this fluid exists because they don't want to do an invasive surgery, or they don't think it's a big deal. But now I'm going to tell you right now in this video the 3 ways that it affects speech, language, and then the third way is how it affects your sensory system. So in the first way, it's speech. And that's kind of Brittany's case. So her kids were developing language fine. She's a homeschool mom who is an amazing teacher, who has a nice background in teaching, and she just couldn't figure out what it was that was causing her to not be able to get through. And I see there's some likes. Thanks. When you are when you know how to teach your child, but your child's not learning, there has to be some kind of way, some kind of reason, some kind of thing that's going on. And so I just started to ask her questions after I talked to my friend Dr. Christine the other day about things like diet and, what the doctor had said, if she had talked to her doctor about it. And he was reluctant to send her for speech therapy because he thought, well, this fluid is not a big deal. And because her little guy's only 3, and it was just, some of the sounds that didn't sound accurate. And she told me a little bit about the sounds that he was having. And I said, I get it. They're the quietest sounds. So when the fluid is in there, no matter how much fluid is in there, it decreases the ability of hearing speech. Now, you might hear sounds, but you're not going to hear the quietest sounds. And when we're talking about words and saying the sounds of articulation, in one word, a word like splash, there's some sounds in that word that are very loud. The ah and the sh are louder sounds, but the s at the beginning, you might not even hear because there's a strong p right after it. So if you're not hearing completely well, you might hear that as pash. And you won't get the S or the L because you hear that. And you're not going to hear all those little sounds. So if you hear the word, yeah, and it's close, but the quietest sounds in the words are the ones that you miss because your hearing isn't quite as good as otherwise. So this is what fools people. They think, my child understands everything I'm saying, and I know they hear when I talk to them because, when you are talking to them and you really want them to know, you make sure they understand you. Hang on, I got a nose thing. I got to itch my nose. Didn't want to be disgusting. Okay. All right. So that's the thing about the fluid. It affects the speech because you're not going to hear the quiet sounds. Now, the other way, getting back a little bit, to the anatomy of how things happen, is that when you don't hear those sounds, early in our development, the auditory nerves, the very specific nerves that our brain uses to hear the difference between a p and a b and a s and a ul, those things are developing in our brains from the time we're before birth until, all along adolescence, I think, even. So what happens is those nerves are kind of stumpy like this at birth. And every time you hear new sounds, those nerves grow and they get refined. And they're kind of like trees, like this. And the nerves develop and they grow. So when you don't hear those sounds, you hear some, but not other ones, the quiet ones. Those nerves kind of stay stumpy or they only grow part way. And that's why if a child has a period of time where they have repeated ear infections and they're not hearing those specific or the quieter sounds of speech, those sounds are not necessarily, they're going to be normally left out. And in a word, the last sound of a word is usually the quietest. So unless it's a vowel on the end. So if it's something on the end like pot, that t on the end is actually going to be the quietest sound of the whole word. So a child with ear infection, fluid history, is going to hear that word pa. And they're not going to hear the T part all the time because it's going to sound like pot. And, the P is stronger, the ah is very much stronger, and they're already paying attention to that. And while they're learning that thing that you're saying, pot is the thing you're holding in your hand or the picture or the whatever, they're not paying attention to how that word is articulated. So if you don't hear it and you're not paying attention to it because it's new and you're just trying to get the idea of the whole thing, you're not going to hear the details. So if you can't hear the details and you're already not listening for the details, then you're going to develop the habits of losing the details. And that's why the number one speech issue, not language. These are kids who are using lots of words. This is like Violet's little girl. This is like the folks like Brittany who I talked to on the phone. Kids who are jabberboxes, but you can't understand what they're saying. It's because they're in their history, as those nerves were developing, they only got stunted. And they're just not used to listening to them specifically like they are the other sounds, which is why it's important when you're talking to kids with ear infections and you're teaching those things that you model things very appropriately and precisely for them and slowly so that they understand to start to look for the details and intuitively connect with them so that you understand that they're interested enough to look for the details. And that's the whole other videos. But now we're talking about ear infections. So that's the number one reason. That's the whole reason. that kids with ear infections, ear fluid, any kind of ear situation that's clogging their ear canals is going to cause issues with speech sound development. All right. The second thing is about the speech and language system, generally learning language altogether. Because if kids have a significant enough hearing loss that's periodic, they're going to hear little enough of the words that they aren't paying attention to them at all. That it all starts to sound a little like want, what, want, what, want, what, want. Where a child who has lots of words and their hearing loss was more mild, will be using words you can't understand. A child with a significant fluid blockage, big glue ear, lots of heavy-duty infections with pain, those kids aren't going to be interested in language at all, because remember, their pain factor is helping them to stay distanced. They don't want to focus on you. They don't want to learn. And if a child who's fast talking and had ear infections isn't listening for details, certainly a child who's not even interested in you using words at all is going to be listening for details. So it could be, it has to start with those kids where it begins, where starting to use words is interesting and effective for them, and they need to learn more rudimentary ways to use language effectively from the beginning. So that's different ways that ear infections can cause language issues, and it depends on severity. It depends on the kid's tolerance for the pain. It depends on the root cause. So, if ear infections are caused from massive allergies and chronic head congestion and things like that, that's just going to make a child generally physiologically miserable. And anybody who's generally physiologically miserable isn't going to learn language. They're going to rely on rudimentary ways to get their needs. They're going to want to point. They're going to want to use gestures. They're going to want to just rely on people to anticipate their needs. Because if you feel crummy, you can't do work. So that's the whole bottom line, is that, it affects your language system because you're not able to engage and learn language to begin with. All right, and the third thing I was going to tell you about, I know this live's getting long, but there was a lot I got to tell you, and I'm really glad. Thank you so much for sticking with me with this, and I hope the information is valuable. If you're enjoying what's going on so far, give me a thumbs up. There's some nice folks here watching. Luce is here, and John is here. John is one of my newest language facilitation parents, and they live in a foreign country in Sweden. I'm so excited. Anyway. So, hi John, thanks for joining me today. I'm so glad you guys are all here and you're getting this information about how ear infections affect speech and language. And right now I'm going to tell you about how it affects your sensory system. So, we already talked a little bit about how kids with a lot of ear pain might be withdrawn and socially distant from other people. Another thing that, affects these kids is because of that pressure that I talked about, that it literally feels like you're stuck in an elevator going up and down all day. Because some days it might be pressure less, some days it might be pressure more if you've got a chronic congestion issue. And it sloshes around in there, and all of that feeling of that fluid in your head is, number one, very distracting. Again, it might not be painful, but it might be painful, just the pressure from having it. Your eardrum is they call it a drum because it's a movable avenue where fluid builds up behind here and it actually pushes out. That's how doctors know if there's fluid in there. They look for the eardrum to be bulged. And so that bulge is pressure. And that's what you feel when air makes that pressure in there when you go up in the airplane. And if that pressure is constant, then what happens sometimes is kids who have constant pressure and then they get it relieved, like they put a tube in there, suddenly that pressure's relieved, and that can make a kid behave different. They're used to the pressure, and they might do things like bang their head or chew on things or crunch on things. Kids with ear infections and any kind of ear fluid, they get stuck on pacifiers. And these are the kids who aren't just chewing on their pacifiers socially. These are the kids that are like, sucking. Kids who like to use sippy cups with the one-way valves and are doing that all the time. They might not even be drinking out of it, but they love their cup. And it's because sucking against that one-way valve actually kind of, it kind of lets you move around that fluid. And you know how when you're an adult and you got congestion in your head and you do that nasty, all that stuff you're trying to do with your nose? Kids use sucking and chewing and, and banging like this. They might bang their head. They do that stuff because of that pressure. And I see a lot of likes that time. And so, if you didn't know a child who, is having that kind of fluid and they're stuck on a pacifier or they're banging their head or doing those things, you can understand how parents get concerned that their kids look like they have autism when they have these things going on. They're, number one, antisocial, and number two, a sensory mess. Because they've got constant pressure in their head. It's changing. It might be good one day, bad another. They might have it for a long time, and then you relieve it, and then they don't know what to do because all of a sudden there's that pressure. And when you think about what does it feel like in his head, when you can look behind your eyes, when you think about if you've ever had a sinus infection or something like that, where it's just the pressure in your head is like the balloons on the old commercials they have for the decongestants and stuff. I think that's the deal. A little kid doesn't, especially if they're nonverbal, they don't have a way to articulate that to you. The pressure in my head is crazy, Mom. So, if your child does those kinds of sensory things, if that's their sensory go-to, is a chew, a crunchy chip, a pacifier, a sippy cup, things like that, then it's telling you that there's something missing, that they need something in that sensory system. These kids also are jumpers. They love to jump on trampolines and burn it out because they feel that pressure and it actually becomes normalcy for them. And that's why sometimes after kids get that relieved, they seek that pressure by crashing and burning in their whole environment. They might love to punch. They might love to crash into walls because that feeling of pressure. Vestibular issue, Brianne says, yes. Thank you, Brianne. That's the whole part we didn't even think about is the vestibular issue. So the vestibular is the balance system in your head, and that's right in your ear system, in your ear, in the middle of your ears. There are three little tubes. There are three little tubes that are full of fluid, and the fluid sloshes around there, and that's why when you're dizzy, it feels like you're on a boat, because when you're on a boat, you're on fluid, and you're moving like that. And when there's fluid in your ears, and there's infection in those systems, and they're gunked up so they can't move properly, and then that fluid changes back and forth. It's like sometimes you're on a boat, sometimes you're off a boat. And think about how that is going to just affect your daily life. If you always feel dizzy because there's fluid in your ears and you don't have any way to communicate that to people, and the medicine they're giving you to treat it is making your stomach upset, and the infection in your ear hurts, that's a lot going on. It's hard to learn anything. And so that's why, if the bottom line message is, once you get that taken care of, once you get the fluid, the ear situation taken care of, and it's only typically chronic. Now, some kids have other issues, if there's chronic, illnesses and things like that go on, ear, nose, and throat, structural stuff. I mean, but for the majority of kids who have ear infections because of this early childhood Eustachian tube position, situation, my lack of professional whatever, because of that, kids do grow out of this situation. So the first thing that you need to know if you have a child who has ear fluid is figure out a way to get rid of the fluid ASAP. The second thing is when you're communicating with them, you need to be as basic and simplistic as possible so they don't miss the stuff they're not paying attention to, okay? And so once you get this physiology taken care of and you start using regular language, a lot of times this comes back. But some of those articulation issues may persist. And that's kind of the situation that happened, exactly sort of the evolution of how it happened with my clients. Anyway, Summer. I don't know why I forgot her name. Anyway, Summer's little girl. They had to get the physiology changed. And then their little girl started to get interested in words. And then they can start to work on the articulation issues and overcome some of the issues that are going on. Because now they know she can hear. Now they know that her physiology all works great. And, the methods that Summer always knew she had in her are working. And that's kind of the situation that's happened with the gal that I talked to, Brittany, today. I said, you know what, you need to go and see somebody and take care of this fluid first. And then if you can't figure it out, that's when you talk to somebody like me. And it's really important that you don't, if you get stuck because your kids with this ear stuff, it really affects their ability to listen and understand and focus. And it's all about starting with that level, is getting them interested in using the words and making it fun. And if it isn't fun, it isn't fun. And ear infections are no fun. So you got to get rid of the fluid, and then you can start working that way. And if you want to know a plan, like if you are in that situation, just like Summer, and you've got your ear situation worked out, but you just don't know how to get your child out of that isolated, they're kind of afraid of interaction and communication because of their history. They didn't get experience with it like other kids. They didn't hear sounds like other kids because they were dealing with these ear infections. And to help them overcome that resistance to using words and being social and understanding how words are fun and working, that's what I help people do. That's where my intuitive skills come into play and my experience as a speech pathologist and working with people like that. So if you're one of those families and you've got it all set and you want to know how you can do it and get your child to start fixing, Summer's got her daughter in 3 weeks, just got that final consonant deletion. She's just got it about licked. So that's the thing. Once you get this stuff fixed, if you want to know how to get into that place where your child is now and help them bring their communication out into the real world using words that are effective for them so that they love doing it and they keep talking all the time, that's when you need to schedule a strategy session with me. And you can do that by sending me a private message, going to my website, wavesofcommunication.com. I have a free class there for parents, and you can watch that free class to learn more about late talking, how I work with families, and actually in that video you can see exactly the process that I use to help parents teach their children to use words in 3 to 6 weeks. And I say 3 to 6 weeks, but every family I've had so far that's gotten started, from every issue from autism to just ear infections to bilingualism, to iPad addiction, all those things, these people are getting their kids to start talking in 1 week. And it's just because they're getting in, they're finding where they are, and they're getting to where they're going. So send me a private message. Let me know if you want to communicate. And if you're watching this on YouTube, the link to my website is in the description box. Thank you so much for joining me today for my live. Let's see. The replays are going to be here on my page, and so come back and check them out. Share this video with any parent you know who has a kid with ear infections. I know they'll get something out of it. And thanks so much for joining, and see me tomorrow. Today's day 7, tomorrow's day 8 in the Facebook Live 30-day Language Facilitation Challenge. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody.